Good evening. It is Thursday, January 14th, 2021. This is the Guilford, Connecticut Board of Education. Tonight we have a special meeting to discuss the budget with our district leadership team. So principals and other leadership throughout the district. This is an opportunity for the board and the district leadership team to talk together, for the board to ask questions, and for the district leadership team to share their thoughts on the proposed budget that is in front of the board, and in general thoughts around budgeting for next year. Welcome. I do want to welcome again the district leadership team and thank you all for taking the time to meet with us. There are a couple of ways we can go about this. We do this every year, obviously. A couple of ways we can go about this. The first is to kind of start with the board members. I know there are numbers of us who, having read through the proposed budget book and heard Dr. Freeman's presentation on Monday, have some questions from you. Likewise, we welcome thoughts that you have, things that you'd like us to consider as we look through this proposed budget. So I really welcome a back and forth conversation. I think what I'll do is start with board member questions, see if anyone has any questions they'd like to start off with. We obviously, as you note, have principals from each of our schools. Jake is with us. Thank you, Mr. Jarvis, for joining us tonight. So we can talk about some athletic issues. Mr. Scanziano is likewise with us. So again, I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues and see where any of you might like to start in terms of discussing the proposed budget or any line items in front of us. Mr. Sands, go ahead.
One of the things that I thought was interesting in the budget was that there was a significant reduction in the budget for periodicals. And it was explained to us on Monday, I believe, or maybe it was in Linda's answer to some questions, that this is because many of the periodicals have been replaced by a new software program which we're subscribing.
Mr. Sands, we've just lost you on mute.
All right.
So I think I have the gist of the question. I would be happy to invite Dr. Crystal. We have what we've done is we've sort of collapsed a number of individual periodical costs into a service, Newsela. Anine, would you want to talk a little bit more broadly about Newsela?
Yes, we are now subscribing to Newsela, which is very commonly used across the state, and it's a database of all kinds of articles on all kinds of content areas. There's science, literacy, math, social studies, current events, all kinds of things in there. There's a professional learning tab, there's a social emotional learning tab. And so this has become a major resource for where teachers are getting their materials to use within the classroom. And a lot of the periodicals that have been routinely ordered are collapsed into that platform, and so they're not necessary anymore. And that, you know, a lot of the periodicals too that were paper are now also digital, and so that has taken up some of that material as well. So the cost has dropped in the periodicals line.
The database is searchable by content, by topic, by subject area, by grade level, and so it allows teachers a greater level of control without necessarily restricting. In fact, it probably expands their reach into the periodicals rather than buying individual topics. Linda, while there's a decrease in periodicals, there's a corresponding increase because of the Newsela subscription. Does that fall under software? Where does the Newsela subscription fall?
No, the Newsella subscription is under district media, and it's
you go.
actually in the other contracted services line.
It is an efficiency overall, but it's also sort of a redirection, and it should make the work easier in the classroom, especially in the condition we find ourselves in now. It's easier to find digital copies rather than having a hard copy in the classroom.
Yeah, I just want to add too, another advantage of Newsella is there are abilities to differentiate the text that kids are reading, which is not typical of a regular online periodical. So teachers and students are able to adjust reading levels and make adjustments that are appropriate to whatever they're reading and so that they can access the text more easily.
Dr. Crystal, may I ask a clarification? So you're suggesting that one text might have several versions? Is that what you are saying?
Yes, what they do is they adjust the readability of the text based on what students' readiness level is, and there is the ability of both the teacher and the student to make those adjustments. But the teacher can also lock the text into a specific level. So if the teacher is using it as a teaching tool, they can teach it at a certain more rigorous level and maybe read it out loud so that kids can hear it at that higher level. So there's a lot of ways of manipulating, which we have never had in traditional periodicals that we've used.
That's terrific. Thank you.
I'd like to ask a couple of the elementary school principals to give us their view as to whether this has been an effective change for them.
I can speak to that a little bit. You know, some of the resources that we were using before, like Time for Kids or Scholastic, we do still have some monies in the budget to have those. But with Newsella, we're able to search for articles, whereas when we do the regular subscriptions, we really just get whatever's sent to us. So I find that teachers have a little bit more control over the content, or it might be more timely. So I think it's been a good addition to allow teachers a little bit more flexibility in what they put in front of their kids as far as articles and informational texts.
Okay, that's helpful.
Other questions? Go ahead, Dr. Hirsch.
I sent a note around. We've gotten some notes from parents regarding their understanding of what was said at our last budget meeting regarding art, music, world languages, also swimming. So some clarification on each of those would probably be helpful.
Sure. So I can jump in. I can start with the conversation around athletics. I know, Dr. Hirsch, that you had asked. I shared a slide on Monday evening that showed parent contributions that fall in 4 different athletic areas. And then on the same slide, I showed the different booster organizations that have historically been funding assistant coaching positions. And you had asked, what would the dollar amount be to cover all of those parent contributions and then all of those coaching positions? The parent contributions total up to about $79,500 a year. And the coaching positions that are likewise identified are about $18,000 a year. So for the board to assume all of those costs and allow us to delete that slide completely from our budget, it's approximately around $100,000 that it would cost to eliminate those contributions from either fundraising or what we refer to as parent contributions in those areas.
And that's not counting other sports we didn't see up there, like sailing and rowing, that are also dependent on parent contributions.
Crew wasn't. Yeah, so actually, crew was included in that list, and so.
Okay.
So crew was included, although crew is a bit of a unique situation in that crew, in addition to being a school athletic that has parental support, crew also has Why am I not seeing that slide? I
Right there, number
apologize.
18.
Thank you very much. No, that was the decision slide. I had a slide that was just
18.
about,
18.
To your right. To your right.
okay, thank you. I'm not seeing, you're seeing my screen differently than I am. There you go. Thank you for the help with that. So Crew is one of those programs. Crew, however, also we've got sort of a unique relationship with Crew in that the Crew organization is more established than just being a simple volunteer booster club. They are in fact a 501c3, a freestanding nonprofit organization, and we partner with them in that. But to eliminate that parent contribution that is expected every year is part of that $100,000.
Okay.
You're correct. This would not anticipate sailing if sailing came on board in the future, and it does not include that calculation didn't include boys swimming. If boys swimming were to come, and this budget assumes boys swimming out of the collaborative wholly owned by Guilford locally, and there is assumption that there could be some parent cost associated with that next year as well. But again, ballpark is it would be about $100,000 annually to eliminate those sorts of contributions from our local budget.
Okay, that's helpful.
When we talked about swimming, I think part of the confusion around some of the parent communications that are happening around swimming, and Linda and Jake reminded me that I contributed to that confusion with a response to an email earlier this week. We don't break out individual components of individual sports. In Mr. Jarvis's budget, there's a budget line for athletic transportation. We don't individualize down to a specific run for the swim team, the basketball team. Those monies are fungible and we move monies across. We do look at every sport and try to tally up how much would the officiating costs be, how much would the travel costs be, how much would the coaching costs be. And that is how Mr. Jarvis creates his budget every year. But then he's just got an athletic budget with he's got a transportation line, he's got an officiating line. I think that there continues to be some confusion when we talk with a booster club organization who tries to tally their expenses and then break that out per family as they request their contribution compared to the way that we keep track of and budget our expenses. So the bottom line is that last year we had budgeted we had $18,839 spread across the boys and the girls swim team. There was a significant increase associated with transportation around the boys team when our cooperative went from being housed in Branford to being housed in North Haven. And so the suggestion this year is that with the additional $10,000 across the two teams, we will have budgeted approximately $30,000 for both the boys and the girls swim teams. And those costs will be divided almost equally at roughly $15,000 apiece. There is a discrepancy because the boys' head coach position is slightly higher pay because it's a longer season, because of the length of the season. Those dollars would essentially cover the costs for a head coach, transportation, and officials officiating. There's some minor costs associated this year only in the rebranding that would be associated with it. Again, the bottom line for us is that when we take over a sport, we will cover the coach, the transportation, and the officiating expenses associated with that. We don't actually say to the sport, you've got $8,000 for transportation, because if they don't spend $8,000, it doesn't get to roll over. It doesn't belong to them. Again, the dollars are fungible. It could end up going to offset an unexpected expense in another sport, or quite honestly, it could end up covering a shortfall related to something that has nothing to do with athletics if we ask you, the board, to transfer it out to another line. This budget with these additional $10,000, again, would be spread equally over the two teams, roughly equally over the two teams, would cover head coach, transportation, and official costs. Much of the pool time would still be picked up by what we see on this slide as a family contribution. Those dollars would not be enough to cover pool time for both of the teams completely, or to add an assistant coach to each of those 2 teams in this budget year. And again, if we wanted to absorb all of those costs for swimming as well as hockey as well as crew, we'd be in the ballpark of 100,000, 110,000 if you added, you know, it wouldn't be 10,000 more, around $100,000, even if you added boys swimmings, if we wanted to add that to the base athletic budget and not count on fundraising or parental contributions. And again, that's not the only source. An additional source that I failed to mention Monday night is also gate receipts. And those have been impacted over the last 2 years, obviously. Mr. Jarvis does, to some degree, similar to Mrs. Biagietti. Jake brings money into his budget every year when we charge gate receipts for events. And so that has been a source of income this year that has been impacted with a reduced fall season this year, a canceled spring season at the end of last year, and CIAC just released guidance this year. But even if we have a winter season, that's gonna impact indoor spectators and tournament play, which will impact gate receipts further. Jake and Linda, is there anything to that explanation that you two would like to add to make sure that we get into that? Again, I know that I added to the confusion this week.
You seem to cover everything.
Can I just ask a question, Mr. Jarvis? I think one of the things, just so that all board members understand this too, could you confirm that one of the other things that sometimes happens is that if a team ends up with significant postseason play because they have been successful, that those are often funds that aren't necessarily budgeted for, certainly per team, so that given the success of any given team, and certainly we're very lucky in Guilford to have this happen with a great deal of frequency.
Skilled, not lucky, skilled.
Yeah, well, sorry. Yes, I will say, as a Board of Ed not participating myself athletically in any of these endeavors, I am lucky to be on the Board of Ed of such a skilled student body. But those are things that also come up that require you to be kind of accounting for, that are not predictable at the beginning of any given season.
Yes, we don't know where teams are going to end up. And in the past, if I've had $130,000 of transportation and it cost $135,000, the gate receipts covered that $5,000 downfall. Or if we had to buy patches for state championships, or if we had extra runs at the end of the season for field hockey, things that you don't take into account come into play. That's true.
Okay, thank you.
And then Dr. Balistraci, the other piece I want to note is it didn't appear on the slide, but again, I really need to be clear that there are additional parental expenses that are associated with some of these sports that are not associated with all of the sports. Equipment purchases, for instance. Any hockey parent knows that hockey becomes an expensive sport because of the equipment requirements that the school district does not cover. And that in Guilford can affect particularly hockey players, fencers, lacrosse players, in ways that it doesn't necessarily impact students who may participate in the older or more traditional sports. And it has to do with the inventory that we have. It has to do with equipment that exists for some sports that we've never built up around some of the others, some of the other programs.
Well, and I just a quick clarification, just because, to be honest, sometimes I get confused with the terminology that we talk about. And for those that are listening, and we did get an email the other day asking about swimming specifically, but just the term pay to play. And just to clarify for her, we're not a pay to play athletic program.
That is exactly right. And that's why I've tried to be cautious with the language on the slide that I just shared. We are not pay for play, and we do not levy family or parental fees for any of our programs. The slide that I shared essentially is a summary of contributions, of volunteer work, of donations that get made to the school system. But we want to be really clear that we consider all of those to be voluntary donations that are made. If there is any student who wants to participate in any program, we will not bar them because of an inability to make a parental contribution or to volunteer at any one of those fundraising activities or events. I do have to say that because some of the programs rely so heavily on those contributions or that community fundraising, it doesn't always feel that way to every family involved. There's a certain amount of positive peer pressure that gets applied to those programs. In past years, we've sent out written communications, and it's a bit of a tightrope because while we want to absolutely make clear that no student will be barred from participation, we also don't want to discourage the kind of environment that exists around the fundraising and the donations that get made on behalf of those programs. Our booster clubs do, like our PTOs, like the GFFE. There are a lot of organizations that raise monies that help us to provide really good opportunities for our students that don't otherwise fall within our formally taxpayer supported budget. And so I want to be clear that we support the booster clubs and the work that they do. It's just that in some sports, the cost is so high that it's not covered by car washes or by t-shirt sales. It is a suggested family contribution that the organizations sort of organize around and monitor and then shift to us in the form of a contribution or a donation that they make to the school system. We do not collect individual family fees or student fees to participate in any of our programs.
Dr. Freeman, the $10,000 that we've allocated for swimming, that's a brand new $10,000, correct? That's not the $6,000, I think, is what we normally do. This is a brand new allocation for them, right?
That is $10,000 on top of approximately $19,000 already in the budget. And we're talking about both boys and girls swim teams here, right? In last year's budget, we carried approximately $19,000 for swimming. And it was distributed really differently because one of our swim teams was a standalone local program and the other one was part of a cooperative. So the funding of those two different kinds of programs is different. For the cooperative, we pay into that arrangement. For the local team, we pay the costs as we accrue them. So this would be $10,000 new dollars in this year's budget to be placed on top of the $19,000 that already exists in the budget. And again, it would also move towards the first time ever of having two local standalone swim teams, one for boys and one for girls. Do need to remind the board and the community that we have an informal bar of at least 10 students participating. And so if either one of those programs fell below 10 students in interest, we would likely not offer that program in that year.
Mr. Jarvis, what percentage of our students participate in interscholastic athletics?
Around 66, 67%.
And Jake,
1,100 kids, it's like 600 and it ranges from 620 to 690.
And how does that compare to our peer communities?
I don't know.
It's healthy and it trends toward, I think, the higher end of that kind of participation. And Jake, I meant to ask you in advance, not to put you on the spot, do you have a sense of how many programs we offer in our catalog of extracurricular athletics?
It's in the 30s if you count all the teams that they have, like basketball. Boys basketball would have 3 teams: a freshman, JV, a varsity team. So we're in the high 30s, I think, with all the teams that we have on a non-COVID year.
Jake, on the sheet that you sent me the other day, and if you count freshman, JV, and varsity, there's 48 teams at the high school. And if you count the middle school sports, it's about 60 teams.
I haven't done my math lately.
but remember, some of those are redundant. That could be a freshman, a JV, and a varsity football team.
Right.
So it's not 48 unique sports. It's 48 different. Right. Yep.
Mr. Jarvis, quick question on that. With all those teams, do we fund out of the budget all the head coaching positions and assistant coaching positions, or just one position per team? How does that get allocated throughout those teams?
Some teams have more coaching positions than others. We have allocated head and assistant coaches, but some
Yeah.
programs have more that our parents, booster clubs donate to. Like you had on the slide there, you see girls lacrosse, the booster club donates an assistant coach, an extra assistant coach. Same thing with baseball and football. Football had the assistant coach, and the budget before I came here took it away. So the parents have always raised money and donated another assistant coach.
We
Okay.
cover all the coaching positions except for the 5 showing here. So we cover all the head coaching positions, and then we cover all of the assistant coaching positions, excluding these 5. And again, this is not right. This is in any given year, if the boosters did not make this contribution, then we'd have a choice to make. We would have to decide whether that position doesn't exist or whether we try to fund it locally. But these are the 5 that we sort of count on because these booster clubs have regularly come forward and provided this funding for us. And again, it's a gift, it's a donation, it's a contribution. It just has become an expected contribution because they've done it so regularly that we've come to sort of count on it.
So what's our total athletic budget, in at least an approximation of that? I'm just trying to figure out what $100,000 is a percentage of.
Linda?
Because we have a lot of students. We have a huge athletic, I mean, I say this in good sense. That's a lot of participation.
Yes. Yeah, it touches a lot of our students. Linda, do you have a bottom line?
Yes, so it's 738,000, and that includes the coaches' salaries. In your budget book, there's a tab
Budget.
for summary by location, and the second page in that section is a summary of athletic expenses.
So $100,000 would be about, 1/7, 1/8,
Yes.
12%. We would require a 12% increase in our athletic budget.
Yes. Yeah, and this year we're showing a 3.6%
Actually,
increase in that area.
Yep.
Oh,
I'm
sorry.
sorry, it's 751,000 with the funds that we have. I
Okay,
looked at the wrong column.
so 800.
Right. So you can see that the community contributes a significant amount. And again, that number does not include gate receipts, right? We know that there's another form of contribution when we host a playoff game and we ask a parent to pay a gate receipt coming to see their own child play. But that's another way that we raise funds in that area that doesn't show here. The community contributes a significant portion of that expense beyond what the taxpayers are asked in the base budget.
In a normal year, what would our total gate receipts be?
Gonna have to refer to Jake and Linda again, or defer to Jake and Linda again. Euler?
It's been so long since we've had a normal year. I don't have the number with me.
Yeah.
Okay, we can look back and get that answer to you, Mr.
We can
Sands.
get it for you.
Can I
And
ask?
again, to Dr. Balistrasi's point, it may be hard to have a regular year because on a year that we have deep runs into playoffs and host some of those games, we have differing numbers of, we don't generally charge gate receipt. We don't charge at the gate for most home games with the exception of Friday night football games. And so it might be pretty variable, but we can look back, Mr. Sands, and get back to you.
Mrs. Rader, go ahead.
Thank you. I just had a question, and it's just something I've been thinking about for a while. We talk about, that it's a contribution and that parents aren't expected to, put this forth if they can't. But I'm curious, have we ever studied or understood how many families actually take advantage of that opportunity? They can't afford it. And for whatever reasons, it's not in their abilities to contribute to the booster club. I'm just curious how many families are actually feeling comfortable enough to do that or participate in that. Have we ever, it's a very private thing. So I'm imagining it's possibly something that's just managed with the booster club. So we don't even know.
I was just going to say, I do think there's a fair amount of that that's handled by the booster club, right, that may be or may not be facilitated through a coach or the athletic department.
Yeah, I was going to say, we're actually going to have to ask to get back to you on that one, because I'm not sure that Jake or Linda or I could answer that completely
Yeah.
right
Well,
now
and-
without reaching out to some of the booster organizations.
I know, it just, it just comes to the same thought that if it becomes too burdensome on families, they're just not going to be able to do it. And that's really the thing that bothers me about it the most, is to think that there are families that, although it's called a contribution,
Yep.
social pressure is, of course, you don't want to be the one family that doesn't do that. So it's just asking a question. Thanks.
Our booster
You're
groups
exactly
have been very good in supporting those families, and people that have come to me, and I've talked to booster club presidents privately, and they've done a tremendous job of making sure that those kids get everything that's there without charging them or getting another person to donate a little bit more who has better means. So they do a great job, our booster groups.
So you feel like the families do actually seek it out and it does happen. Okay, good.
I think it's fair to say we know that some families seek it out, and we know that we've responded well. I don't know if there's a way for us to, I wouldn't be comfortable saying that every family that felt uncomfortable sought that kind of support. I wouldn't want to characterize it in that way, but we can talk offline and get back to you a little bit more thoroughly on that. We do know that support is being offered. I just want to be cautious about trying to characterize it as knowing. I wouldn't want to suggest that there isn't some family out there that pride will not allow them to say we need this kind of, I just don't want to say that. I think that that's a really valid concern.
Thanks. Yep. Thank you.
Dr. Hirsch, you also noted a question about that we've received some communications, right, about art and world language, and the proposal in this budget that shifts some of that world language time and funding to art in the elementary schools. Were you seeking a clarification for some of the people who wrote to us? I know there was at least one email that suggested a little bit of confusion about the amount of those shifts.
Yeah. Well, there's some concern about the art versus music, because some of the music money is going to art. Some reduction in music, as I understood it, or at least the email said.
Spanish.
And that the world language email we received was a comment that that it wasn't correctly described, that we heard that it was more a cultural kind of instruction versus an actual language instruction. So
yeah, I can
emails that we got.
I can start. And so the first thing that I want to know, and I understand that, to some degree, there's some just semantics at play here, but anytime that the budget shows a reduction in one area and increases in another area, that people immediately create a one-to-one correspondence. I want to be clear that the reduction in music specifically, that is scheduled, that is budgeted to the Adams Music Department, in no way is being done to allow us to afford any increase in art at the elementary level. The decision the decision about reducing staffing at Adams in the area of music is being made, and in fact it's in response to declining enrollment in that building, and in fact it's a little bit delayed, right? It probably should have been done a year or two sooner than it's being done now. It's on the back end of the enrollment decline rather than anticipating or paralleling an enrollment decline. That in no way is being used to offset the cost or the funding of an increase in art. Now, the one piece, and while that is usually an absolute statement about budgeting, in this case, that's a little muddied when you talk about the world language staffing and the art staffing specifically at the middle level. And that, again, is not a funding decision. That's a decision based on time. That we recognize that as a forced choice based on the limited number of minutes in a school day. So for the last 3 years, this board has heard pretty regularly from constituents who have been asking to have increased art opportunities and increased art experiences at the elementary schools. Currently, we have one of the shortest elementary school days in the state of Connecticut. And the idea of increasing art exposure and art opportunities in that school day would require us to either extend the school day or to reduce something else. And we've looked at a number of creative solutions. And what we ultimately came to in this proposal is that if we reduce the world language contact time, we can increase the art contact time. I spoke about the fact that culture, and again, it's not a one-to-one correlation. We're not going to lift the culture experiences from a world language program and drop them into an art program. But the idea of talking about diverse cultures and the idea of using those two different subject areas as ways to help students be aware of the diversity of culture that surrounds them, while that will be achieved in different ways, it is something that can be achieved in each of those programs. The design here in the broadest terms, and when I spoke on Monday night, I said, for purposes of illustration, assume you've got an hour of one and a half an hour of the other. And that was inaccurate because those times were not specific or detailed or clear. I think the better way to say it is that this suggestion moving forward means that students will have overall less contact in the world language program with increasing contact in the art program. And while that's not a financial cost, while I recognize that that's not a cost I can show in the budget, we do recognize that that's a cost. We recognize and acknowledge that that is both a compromise and a cost, but we don't gain new without a cost somewhere. So, and having laid all that groundwork, I'm happy to invite the elementary principals to talk a little bit more specifically about what scheduling might look like. And I'm happy to invite Dr. Crystal to talk a little bit about what some of our ideas around what the art programming, the expanded art programming can look like.
I can jump in if you want me to first.
Yeah, thank you, Bill.
And as Dr. Freeman said, I think that in looking at the balance between our related arts and the thoughts of community members over the past several years, I think it's been a conversation, these past few years about art and our other related arts areas. So, and I think it's a series of compromises to try and figure out. And it's not what we tried to do is we went through the process and in our conversations and not have it be, all of one and none of the other, but certainly a balance of opportunities for our students. I think the best way maybe is just to give an example. So in the past, pre-COVID, students at the elementary level had one art class per week. And that was primarily 30 minutes. I think our second, third, and fourth grades were 40 minutes. We could bump it up a little bit. At A.W. Cox, I had an art teacher for 2 days a week. So it was a 0.4 position at A.W. Cox. Our first through fourth grade classes for world language had 3 of those sessions a week. So they had 3 30-minute sessions a week compared to the 1 session per week for art. Increasing the art to more full-time and a decrease in the world language, the way that I'm thinking about it, and we have not had a conversation at the elementary level, and that's often how we'll go through the budget process and then start to sit down and really have conversations to be as consistent as possible at each of our schools. But one way to think about it is to increase that art to 2 sessions per week for the classes. And one way to think about it for the world language is instead of you can't say it's 1.5 sessions per week necessarily, but I thought about it kind of in an incremental step as they make their way towards middle school. Maybe first and second grade classes have 1 world language class a week, and third and fourth grades have 2 world language classes a week. And that ends up being, half the sessions if they had all had 3 in the past. So again, that's just one way to think about it, but that's kind of, we haven't eliminated it, but we've recognized that as the kids get older, we want them to have exposure to world language. It's primarily Spanish. We could always discuss whether the need is more for world cultures and kind of global citizenship and transform it into that, but it's primarily Spanish culture and language. So, but that's how my initial thoughts about it as far as scheduling and what it looks like at the elementary level.
But excuse me, but I'm confused. Let's, Bill, let's go through this again. Right now, the world language is how many half-hour periods? 3?
3 half-hour. Well, not right now. In the past, pre-COVID, it was 3 half-hour periods a week.
All right. And we're proposing that goes from 3 to, in effect, 1.5.
Based on,
that would be the staffing that we have, yes.
Right.
Okay.
So that would be what the staffing proposal. Now, how a principal uses that resource provided to build the schedule can then impact how that looks, as Bill described. It could look different for a 4th grader than for a 1st grader.
Okay, fine. And the art right now is 1 30-minute period, and you're proposing that it goes to what?
I would propose it goes to 2 30-minute periods or the equivalent of that.
Somehow we lost some time in here.
Mr. Sands, I mean, I'm not sure that, it's always going to be, we gain 45 minutes from one and it turns into 45 minutes of the other based on staffing and the configurations that Mr. Grimm is suggesting could happen, one of perhaps several configurations.
And also art covers K through 4, whereas world language only covers 1 through 4. So the increase would be for,
that's part of the difference,
for kindergarten as well. For art.
And at Lakes, art covers pre-K too. So at Lakes, it's different because we have 3 sections of pre-K. So all of our related arts teachers, other than Spanish, have to cover those 3 pre-K classes. And the difference in terms of time where you may be looking at things is, again, in the upper grades for art, they get 40 minutes, whereas the lower grades, they get 30 minutes. So there's that 10-minute difference too.
Thank you. That's really helpful. So there are differences here that can mean the difference of 10 or 15 minutes, or depending on exchanging one for another and staffing and the grades in which students are in. Okay.
And again, important to note that the conversation here is about allocating the resource. We would be, and we have not completely designed out what these schedule implications would be. We would be happy to come back to you at a CIA committee meeting next year and report out what the specifics ended up looking like. And I think it would make more sense to do that minute comparison once we've got hard schedules and we know exactly what it looks like. We again are talking about, we're talking about the budget in specifics, but we're only talking about scheduling and staffing at a very high level still. And so there's a level of detail that does not exist. And there's always a chicken and an egg thing that goes on. Do we allocate the resources first before designing out what the specifics will look like? Or do you design out the specifics down to the last detail and then come forward and maybe not end up with the resources to make that happen? And so particularly in this year, we're still talking about the specifics of scheduling at a fairly high level right now.
Which is, I think, helpful information for us as a board and also certainly for the viewing public, because we will get questions about this. And it certainly does help to understand that the details are important once implementation happens. What we're talking about is budget staffing at a higher level.
But the thing that we can say is that as we look at this budget moving forward, while we will maintain both world language and art at the elementary schools, the ratio will begin to change from what it was. There will be less contact in world language and increasing contact in art. And then we will develop more detail for that. And again, would be happy to report out to you at a CIA committee next year about what that might look like.
Great.
Anine, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the conversation that has been around art with teachers and then with also with Dr. Seiler?
Well, I think just as you said, this is something that needs to be built out more, but the preliminary conversations have really been talking about approaching this from two different angles, two lenses that are complementary to each other. One is the cultural context, looking at art within a cultural context. What is the time period during which it was developed? What was happening with the artist? What was happening with the audience? Learning the history behind those pieces. And then the other piece of that is the content integration piece. So looking at it through a lens of, how is the artwork going to complement what's going on in the other content areas with what the kids are learning in social studies, with what they're reading in language arts, even with what they're doing in science and math, if possible. So there's still curricular work that needs to be done with that, but those are our preliminary conversations. The work Dr. Seiler's been doing with us has been rooted very often in the arts, and he speaks about the culturally responsive instruction often through the lens of the arts. So it really does lend itself to that kind of curricular work.
I ask another question relating to this. What's the status of the Artist in Residence program?
So that question's been asked a couple times. There are dollars in this current budget for the Artist in Residence this year. We were holding those, hoping that if there was some easing of COVID restrictions, that we might be able to take advantage of that this year. At this point, halfway through the year, and seeing no such lessening of restrictions, it's clear to say that there will be no Artist in Residence program this year, and that those dollars will probably be used to offset some of the unanticipated COVID expenses that we are experiencing this year. As we move into next year with this increase in art staffing, we're going to have to evaluate whether or not it makes sense to have a Artist in Residence program on top of this increase in art contact time that we'll be providing locally at the school. I think initial consideration is that that's not something that we would be continuing. That was one of the creative suggestions that came up when we found ourselves being limited in increasing art opportunities because of the length of the school day. In this response, again, while there's an associated cost and contact time in another area, does sort of respond to that desire to increase the art opportunities. Not sort of, it directly responds to the desire to increase the art opportunities.
How much is in the budget this year for the Artist in Residence?
It was a total of 20,000, I believe, Linda.
It got reduced back down to 10.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. 10,000.
Yes, Moira, go ahead.
Getting back to Adams and the music staffing reduction. Again, I brought this up the other night, but I'm getting a lot of questions about it, and I was just wondering what might that look like. And again, I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but I understand, like, only because I have kids in the district, that the 8th grade class is the second largest class, and they'll be, moving on to the high school. I think the 10th grade is the largest we have. So you speak of enrollment, but I just want to know what that's going to look like. We have orchestra, we have band, we have chorus. So I'm just curious what that looks like and how many staff members remain and all that.
So I'll invite Mr. Regan to speak to that. But before I do that, I'll just start by again saying that, right, at this level, this decision is very much being based on the numbers. And so to put those numbers out again for everybody before asking Mike to speak to it more specifically, currently at the high school, we have 2.6 teaching positions in the music area, 2.4 of which actually deliver music instruction. And on an average year, they service about 500 students who are taking music courses. At Baldwin, we have 2.3 positions. Now that was that was significantly higher 3 years ago. A similar reduction was made at Baldwin some years ago because of the enrollment as it moved through grades 5 and 6. But at Baldwin, 2.3 positions service about 450 students on a given year. At Adams, we currently still have 3.4 positions, and they're servicing approximately 300 students on a given year. So if you're just looking at the numbers, and if you recognize that like Baldwin before it, Adams has now lost about 30% of its population over the last 3 to 4 years. Last year, we made a significant correction to the language arts staffing at Adams in response to that declining enrollment. So now we'd be looking at the music area for the same reason. Now, that reduction might make sense when you look at numbers on a sheet of paper. What that looks like in the schedule and in the building, I don't think we have a final answer yet, but I'll invite Mike to talk about what some of those possibilities are.
So thank you, Moira. And I checked, it's definitely not Mairead whose birthday that you have to get to, so that's good. I think the idea is, the music folks do things, they keep track of a lot of information, including how many, in essence, how many kids do you lose each year, what you might call normal attrition. Those of you parents who have tried to convince your 7th or 8th grader, stick with it one more year, you're so good at it. And so, I think what we've seen is it's harder to give up the instrument than it is to give up chorus. And I think in the past at Adams, it was easy to give up chorus because you were offered a study hall and I could be there with my friends and those sort of things. So some of the issues I think are kind of, we've started to see like locus of control, that it was easier to get out of that. And I think that, the folks have done a really good job trying to keep those numbers very stable because, for those numbers in orchestra and band, you don't get any new kids, but you pretty much try to keep those kids and they stay stable through high school. And so we do notice a difference specific to chorus. Having said that, what will it look like? The idea for us as we create a schedule is what will it look like so that students won't have any less contact music-wise, music time, but also have built into their schedule the ensemble piece. That's the biggest casualty of the pandemic is the large groups, the concerts, and just the performing, the large practices. So we have to create a schedule that would still have the same opportunities for kids to have their regular contact time and the ensembles for all areas, chorus, band, and orchestra. And, that's incumbent upon us to create. You recall that in the beginning of the pandemic, Adams was thinking of cohorting similar to Baldwin, where kids would stay in the same class every single day and the teachers rotate. And I think you could speak very candidly about what that might be for a 7th or 8th grader. So we decided to do it a little bit differently. But music was a big part of that because if we had cohorted by classroom, it was that much more difficult specific to deliver music and let alone any kind of group experience. So they've done an amazing job trying to create something that seems genuine, but without the threat of performing, which is a big deal when it comes to the pandemic. So, so this is a big deal for folks to have to come to that adjustment, but we have to make the determination as we build the schedule, how do we make sure that the music students get the same level of contact with their instructors and the ability to perform? So if you're asking me exactly what does that look like, I don't know that yet.
No, I don't mean that. I just mean, the music class is going to grow in size to a size that's, twice what the kids are used to being, or even the teacher, or are we just expecting with enrollment scaling down? Unfortunately, I think this year we're going to lose a lot of musical kids because they've just kind of lost a year of being engaged with it. So I'll be curious to see what happens across the district with music next year. But I just didn't know if it, and I don't expect you to have it all figured out. I've gotten a lot of parents, they just hear that staffing is being reduced and they don't know what that looks like, and it
Right.
worries.
Yeah, and right, and it right on the surface, it's it's huge, and again, music and athletics have had a tough year, but But again, it goes back to, the expectation for us is, we have great people, and how do we make sure that the kids have the opportunity to continue on that trajectory so they can continue to do what happens at the high school? And, I think we have a strong K-12 commitment to that in the district. And so we have to be creative beyond looking at exactly what Adams has been accustomed to doing. What do other people do? What other options do we have to be creative to make sure that we don't make those qualitative changes?
Great,
Okay.
thanks.
It's a little away from Adams, but Doug, your school went through a similar reduction in staffing a few years ago. You're on the back end of that now. How did Baldwin respond to the music reductions, and did you feel that it was a loss of contact or quality in the program?
Yeah, I think, sometimes changes like that give an opportunity to be more creative with what you're doing. So actually, I think in retrospect, kids have more contact time with music now than they did prior, believe it or not. But that came from scheduling conversations that, everyone was a part of. And we, as Mike just said, we were creative with how we looked at that. But every child at Baldwin is either involved in a typical year, not in a COVID year, but in a typical year, every child at Baldwin, 5th and 6th, is involved in performance music. So if we have, we have nearly 100% contact in a performance music experience here, and that's an every other day experience. So that's frequent contact. Prior to the staffing reductions, and it was a function of the schedule, quite frankly. But prior to that, we had a percentage of kids, probably 20%, who had no music contact while they were at Baldwin, or just a very small general music contact, a half an hour a week or so. So it actually can open some doors, and the key is to bring everyone into that conversation, of course, and look at what can be done. And as Mike said, our music department, they're a bunch of very good, dedicated, talented people, and I know that we're pleased with what we were able to do here, and I don't have any doubt that can be done at Adams as well.
Excellent, thank you. I had a question. I'm just interested. So one of the things we heard from Dr. Freeman on Monday night, and we can see in the budget book, is an increase of a social work position is presently identified for the high school. I think we've talked about this with this district leadership team pretty continuously for the last several years. We're obviously in a particularly unique situation this year in terms of thinking about kids' mental health. But again, I guess this is a check-in. I think one of the things we hear regularly is we would always love to have more folks within the district addressing mental health stuff with our kids. But I guess this is a check-in about where our principals are how our principals are feeling about that. Certainly, Jason, if you have comments as well, just where we are in that. I think that part of your answer may be that there's still a little bit unknown because our contact time, particularly with our older kids, is cut in half, a lot of them, and what students experience as hopefully we are fully in person come September may reveal itself at that time, and is not revealing itself, at least to us presently. But just, it's always helpful to me to have a check-in about where folks think they are within the school in terms of staffing for needs they're either seeing now or thinking ahead a little bit.
And Jason and Julia both advocated for that position. I'd invite either or both of you to begin conversation. And even though that's the only specific increase built into this budget, I'd encourage everybody else to speak about how your needs in those areas are being met and to what degree they're being met in this budget.
I'm happy to go first. Dr. Bellis-Tracy, I'm so thrilled to have a board that supports, mental health and mental health supports for our kids. It's such a vital aspect of growth and development of our young adults and our teenagers. We're fortunate that we've been able to expand our therapeutic learning center from Guilford High School to Adams Middle School and provide additional supports over the last 2 years to our students. We have a shared social worker that is shared between those two buildings to support those students who experience depression and anxiety and need a place to go. And we didn't have that before, at Adams previously. And so we're thrilled to have that additional support. When I did my analysis and when Julie and I developed the budget proposal and I presented it to Dr. Freeman, it was an analysis of really where we were with our shoreline communities as well. And I'm so fortunate to have a mental health department, and I think we all are, that supersedes that of our neighboring towns. Our kids get high quality, good quality supports. I would love to have more because it's just such a vital need. And anything we could do to protect our kids and to provide our kids with those additional supports, I think is just crucial to their development.
And I would just add that from the high school perspective, several things have occurred that are different this year. One is prior to the pandemic really hitting us, we had an increase of students who were becoming school avoidant, which Mr. Scanziano is well versed in. We had many conversations in previous years about how to deal with the increasing number of students we had who were just not wanting to come into school because of their anxiety. And that's a large part why we have the therapeutic learning center that we have and other intervention programs and or interventions in place. I think what's been highlighted this year is the students themselves are feeling some of the, I don't know if it's pressure per se, but a sense of isolation that they haven't had in previous years. And they are actually actively reaching out to us in a way that they hadn't before. So in our Safe Schools Climate Committee, for example, Mr. Rabin has been working with them. The students who are involved in that committee formed a subcommittee with him to talk specifically about mental health awareness and making the student body more aware of what their resources are and how they can access them. So I think that the downside to the pandemic is that people are feeling more isolated from each other. And obviously that would affect our students as well. I think if there's a silver lining here, we're seeing that they are actually reaching out to us and asking us for access to the resources that we have available in the school. And it was already pretty stretched thin. I think the additional social worker would help across the board with some of the issues that adolescents have to deal with today.
We didn't add in this area last year, but it was the year before that we added the additional shared positions. So this, in fact, this will represent an increase of 2 of these mental health positions across the last 3 budgets, if I'm remembering the timeline accurately.
If I could just add to that for the
yes, please. We'd love to hear from anyone who'd like to share with us.
Although the priority is always on the students, I think it is important to add that our related services staff, our social workers, our school psychologists, spend an awful lot of time helping and counseling families, as well as helping and counseling staff during these last 10 months. And I won't over exaggerate to say that the need has exponentially increased, but it is dramatically increased. And I personally, I worry about our related services staff and the stress and the toll that it's taking on them, because it is a burden with the needs that our students and our families and our staff have at this time.
Thank you for letting us know that.
As an example of that, the social worker who is scheduled out of Cox with Mr. Grimm offered her time to provide a support network to the nurses and health aides who are working in the school right now because of the additional stress that they're feeling related to the pandemic and students who are coming to school and then maybe being identified as symptomatic. And so, yes, those folks who fall into those mental health roles, they're here for the students. We schedule them and budget them based on student enrollment like everything else. But in these last 18 months, these last 12 months, they've been reaching out and supporting colleagues as well. And that's not a minor part of the service they provide to us here.
Thank you. Well, I feel like we've said this before, but to me, it's just such an important aspect of what we do for our students and our staff. But certainly, especially at this time, Dr. Freeman has fed this back continually. But we as a board were part of at least voting in the district priorities, and mental health and the health and safety of our students and our staff is top priority, so that I would request that we continually hear about needs that may come up that any of you are struggling to meet, because I think particularly at this time and what our community is dealing with, we want to make sure that we're able to be responsive.
Also, Dr. Balistraci, I guess there's two things I want to note there. Obviously, and I think you heard it a little bit from the leaders who spoke, but this is an increase of one position, but that's a pretty conservative increase, right? If you, the board, insisted that we had to take 2 or 3 of these positions, we would find work for those individuals. So, right, we're recognizing the need, but we're also not rushing to simply throw dollars in positions at that need. We are being thoughtful about it. Also, I don't want to fail to mention that we do receive supports from other places within the community. Guilford Youth and Family Services being primary, right? And so the mental health supports that are provided to our children aren't limited to those that only appear within our budget. We do get support and regular support from Guilford Youth and Family Services. Their budget this year moving forward, for all of the pressures that we just named about this pandemic on our children, Guilford Youth and Family Services budget is going to be as important this year as the Guilford Schools budget is to protect our kids and support our kids as we continue to move through this unique period of time.
Excellent. Other board members have questions or comments or things they'd like to ask or share? Mr. Sands, you have another question?
Well, I mean, let's go up to 10,000 feet here. The budget is based on the assumption that we will be full on in-person schooling, which we're all praying is going to occur. But when that happens, we're going to go back to having to sort of assess where the students are. And from what I've been reading, it's pretty clear that there has been a loss of learning that we would normally have had this year as a result of all the things we've had to do with the pandemic. And the question that comes to mind is, do we have enough resources in this budget to meet the needs of the students as they try and not only process the new year's learning, but to try and make up at least part of the deficit that's going to be left from this year? And I know that we're being very conscious of dollars and all that, but it seems to me that we're trying to squeeze the wallet here at a time when the need is probably higher than normal. I'd be interested in as to whether the principals think that they have enough resources, enough people to at least start the process of earning back some of what we've lost this year.
I'm just going to mute
No, I think the most important resource we have right now is time. And that's something that is really difficult to be making up with finances, right? I think at the elementary level, we have the personnel that can service our kids within the school day. The only times that we could be looking at anything else is after the school day. I mean, we do squeeze as much as we can out of that. So that being said, I think Guilford's done a really good job of prioritizing what we're teaching to children this year and really accelerating their learning so that hopefully they're not falling behind. And we're really collecting student evidence to make sure that they're not, and we're providing support for kids at the elementary level the best we can. So I'm not sure if you could extend the school day, that would be great. And we could certainly do more, but I'm not sure more bodies can fill that need for time.
Thank you.
Mr. Regan?
Oh, now we're calling on people.
Calling me out, Mr. Sands?
That was a cold call. Are you
Right,
awake?
trying to
Mr.
see if
Regan?
I'm, just like my teachers, trying to see if I was paying attention. I really appreciate that. And I can just tell you from my observation, the greatest need is in the social emotional realm. And what's the disparity that we're going to have in our state, where there are districts who are small, who have been full in person the entire time, other districts who have not seen their children in over 6-8 months. That's going to be a major chasm. And I think that the response from the high school standpoint, and again, I'm biased having, know what that position's all about, is that high school kids will have that need met in a different way. They're far more comfortable talking to somebody in a smaller level, fewer people around, engaging in a relationship, where here in a school like Adams and Baldwin, we can create a community and a culture that kind of prioritizes that, and then, gets connected with the kids. And then we try to get back to the work of the learning. And so I think as far as those resources, I believe, we're fully armed, and well, maybe that's an inappropriate reference. We're fully staffed, but also in a way to be prepared for that, not just to do that academically, but to do it socially, emotionally, because that really is what's driving the challenges now. For what I'm seeing, and I'm sure the other principals will echo it, this concept of being disengaged. That doesn't mean just not having your computer on, but you are not connected to anyone. And a lot of the energy and effort is especially, to try to avoid it all the time with the computer, but how do we connect with those kids so that they feel there's somebody else looking out for them? And that's really where we're putting time to be able to support the kids.
I also think it's really important to note this budget maintains the very positive pre-COVID class sizes that we had in Guilford. We do not, right? We're not sacrificing class size in this budget in order to come in at this conservative level. So while we were concerned and cautious about not coming forward with a budget that was blind to the financial implications of this crisis, we also were not willing to say that we can run elementary class sizes up to 23 and 24. This budget maintains an average elementary class size of around 18 K through 4. It in fact projects smaller class sizes at Adams than we had this year. And while at the high school we brought in some additional staffing this year that was unbudgeted to bring class sizes to or below 20, this budget, returns them to the sizes they were at prior to the pandemic. In most cases around the high school, that is class sizes of around 20, and only in a few cases do you see class sizes that run north of 25 at the high school. And those would be almost for unique courses where we offer a specific course and can only offer it once in the catalog, and so therefore see those larger class sizes. Those are really positive numbers. You look at other school districts around the state and you're not going to see elementary class sizes in the teens, and you're not going to see high school class sizes on the low end of 20. You're going to see them sitting on the high side of 20. I think that, in a recognition of time, as you heard Ms. Ryan mention, we know that our students have been impacted by this. So part of this has to do with our expectations and our pacing. We're going to maintain those positive class sizes. We're going to be responsive to what they've been through. But I don't think that you solve this by hiring a bunch of remedial teachers and creating a bunch of opportunities that pull kids out of classes next year to try to resolve the things that we think they missed this year. We're working with the whole group, and we're going to be moving the whole group forward and bringing everybody with that whole group. And we think that's both the right way to respond. And yes, we think that this budget positions us to be ready to do that. Again, if the community wanted to insist on us taking 20 more teaching FTEs in this budget, we'd find places to use those, but we don't feel that we can honestly come forward and say that we need those to be able to address the need. We started in a good place, and it's going to be easier to recover because we started in a good place. And I think I saw Doug trying to get me to stop talking.
Well, that's part of it, Paul, but honestly, what I wanted to say was the budget also maintains our coaching, right? Our increased coaching. And yes, I think as we move into next year, the number one thing we're going to have to do is support the teachers, because they're the ones who do the actual work with each child, right? So the real work next year is going to be at the classroom level. I would agree, if not more teachers, it's the quality of what they're doing. We've got a motivated staff who are ready to do that. And we just need to give them that real-time professional development. So the fact that we're maintaining coaches to the level we are, I think speaks volumes about the district and our priorities. And I feel very comfortable with that, knowing my staff here and the coaches that work in the district. So, you know, I just want to wanted to make that point, and thank you for supporting continuing that, because I think that's going to be the critical work.
And how great to be in a situation where we're presenting a budget and you, the board, are asking us to make sure that we have enough, rather than coming in and having you know, go through a list of why can't you cut here, why can't you cut here. So I mean, it's worth naming that we very much appreciate these kinds of questions and this level of concern.
Mrs. Sullivan, you had your hand raised, I think.
Before we moved on, I just wanted to ask again, you know, I think to everyone's point, you know, the word disengagement is the big one that comes to my mind. You know, I don't have a ton of worries about academics with my own kids in terms of them losing much, but it's the disengagement that's the most concerning. And it's the stories they come home with about the disengagement of their peers that they're experiencing in terms of, you know, I know with the cameras it's hard, but that's what I've been hearing about the most. And I guess, you know, with 7 through 12, I have some concerns that, you know, that the kids leaving Adams, you know, which everyone here remembers is not their favorite years of their lives. Not Adams, just 7th and 8th grade. Anyways, that those kids are going off to the high school, having been in a hybrid setting, and you know, and then just the kids, you know, going through to the higher grades in the high school. Just wondering what we can do. Do we need more social workers? I don't know who the right person is to support re-engagement over just, you know, sort of not remediation, just re-engagement into learning.
Well, but Amy, what an important point, right? Think about it. Adams is a 2-year experience. Next year's freshman class will have not had a single part of their experience at Adams that was untouched by this pandemic. Their 7th grade ended early and went to full distance learning, and their 8th grade started this way and will be much of a year of hybrid, if not a full year of hybrid instruction. So that freshman class coming in has had their entire Adams experience, upper middle grades, impacted by that. We don't have an answer for you tonight, but it's such an important question, and we're wrestling with that question. I can't tell you how many times I've said to the elementary principals as we walk through kindergarten classrooms that this is the only way that those students know school right now, right? Their whole experience of school is with masks and plexiglass shields and some of their classmates on a smart board. And that's their whole experience, right? Next year, if we get to move You know, and again, I keep saying that next year, our greatest hope is that it will be normal with masks. When will we get to the point that we see smiles in our classrooms again, that we're so far back to normal that we can release the masking standards? We're all going to have to think our way through what our kids need as they move through that transition back to normal. And for some of them, it won't be back to normal. It'll be their first experience of school without masks, of school without social distancing, of school where we expect everybody to, and will we ever get to a point where we expect everybody to be in the classroom again, right? There are some students who the ability to learn from home might be a real boon, and we may have to hold on to parts of that, but we've got a lot of thinking and learning to do in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, I guess just speaking for myself, first of all, I never had a principal like Mr. Regan when I was in 7th and 8th grade, so I can't, but, you know, joking aside, I would, you know, be interested in supporting, you know, adding money if we could come up with a way that we think that that would be helpful, particularly in the 7 through 12 grades.
I don't know. We have a quick answer for that right now. I don't know how I could tell you how another 200, what we would, right? I mean, again, we will find ways to use it, right? We will find ways to use those resources if we want to put them in, but we're not at a position right now where we can say we have a list of things that we cut out and left on the editing room floor. We know that this budget is conservative, but we didn't bring you a budget that we've slashed. We brought you a budget that was conservative. And in a weird way, right, we know that we've got to take a breath and take a pause because we need to get back to normal. So we refuse to allow that to be taking a step backwards, but we do need to sort of, you know, let the school system catch up with us again, catch up to where we were prior to the pandemic. So in a weird way, right, you've never seen an investment slide from us with such small numbers on it before. And so that pause and catching our breath in that way helped in that we don't have a lot of expensive initiatives on this year's in this year's budget, because we do need to let ourselves catch up with where we have been in the past.
So,
Moira, looks like you had your hand raised. Did you? Go ahead.
Yeah, because I wanted to build on what Amy brought up and what Paul was speaking, and Mike knows this. Like, I have a current 8th grader, and her Adams experience has been completely skewed, and she's one of those kids, and I'll be quite frank, and Mike knows this, she really struggled this year, you know, and has gotten to the point, along with a lot of her classmates, that are like, you know what, this distance learning thing, I'd rather just do it full time. That it's just becoming this disengagement, and it's a constant conversation in our house, you know. And even with my 10th grader, you know, they're like, 2 days a week, I might as well just stay home, you know. And I think we're going to be up against a lot of this next year. God willing, we can bring them all back. And the one extra social work at the high school, yes, absolutely. But, you know, and then I have a 6th grader whose whole Baldwin experience has been completely skewed. So it'll be interesting to see, but I'm glad we're maintaining the social emotional resources, but I know we're trying to be very careful with our budget this year, given all of the economic constraints of what the pandemic has done to us. But I'm concerned, as I know Amy voiced and other folks have voiced, that we may need more than we're even planning for, and we can't predict that. But I would defer to those who are the professionals in this, you know, realm to say that, because, you know, Mike's going to inherit a bunch of little 7th graders that have been through the same thing, and Julia's going to inherit these 8th graders, and every transition is going to be hard. The kindergartner is going to, so I just wanted to be on record as just saying, I think, you know, it's wonderful we're adding this component at the high school, and I'm glad to hear from all the principals that they feel they have the resources, but I just want to go in with our eyes open for next year, you know, what those extra needs might be.
Dr. Freeman, if I can add for just a moment, and Dr. Balistraci, one of the important components of work that we're doing starting in February with all of our school psychologists and social workers, as well as some administrators and regular education teachers, is our continued work around trauma-informed practices. We've continued to partner with Dr. Melnick, who provided professional learning opportunities for us in August, to continue that work in preparation for next year. There will always be, and I agree with you, Moira, that there will always be a level of unpredictability as to what we're walking into next year. But we recognize that unpredictability, and I'm really happy that we have this 5-part series and training workshop that will run from February until June with Dave Melnick around the trauma that our kids did experience this year, and to acknowledge that trauma and figure out ways that we can help them cope with the trauma that they've experienced.
Thank you. Others? Dick, go ahead.
This is most helpful because we're moving from, I mean, this particular meeting is particularly helpful on 2 realms. One, it's wonderful to hear from the building leaders because we rarely do. And in my own view, I know the literature on school effectiveness points to principal leadership and competence as the absolutely pivotal, crucial variable. And just listening to the principals here and getting a sense of their perspectives, on top of which they know their stuff, is really encouraging, because it's clear that we do have that level of high level of expertise at the principal level. But we're also talking about policy. That is, the budget is nothing more ultimately than a concrete representation of our highest values and aspirations. And we're normally trying to figure out on the margin what a budget looks like. But now we're talking about, if we had not necessarily unlimited, but more resources in time and money, how would we spend them, particularly in light of what we're going through now? And I think that's really useful. The point that Paul was making a few minutes ago, that this, if we understand this year is partly a transition year by virtue of circumstances, and we take advantage of it as that before we make major policy decisions, I only want to say that makes sense, but that I don't want to lose the conversation too much in the future about prospective policy. That's, what are we learning now that ought to point us to what's going to end up being need for more money and time? And how do we confront that in a way that allows the community to appreciate that as the right kind of conversation, as opposed to a budget question? That if we understood where we really want to go and ought to go, people might say, well, let's find the dollars, as opposed to it being a debate about dollars. So I think this is a particularly powerful conversation this year, around, catalyzed by the budget discussion.
And Dr. Hirsch, if I could, and Dr. Balistraci, stop me if you don't think this is the right moment to offer this, but I do want to say that in that direction, I shared with you earlier this week, a proposal from the Connecticut Superintendent's Organization that is asking the state of Connecticut to look at funding very much in exactly the way that you just described, Dr. Hirsch. And the bottom line is, we're asking the state to consider increases to public education statewide of $78 million per year, pushed out through the next 15 years. We're asking for things like fully funding excess cost. We spoke at an operations meeting earlier this week and said that we feel fortunate when we receive 69 or 70% of the cost that we incur in excess costs, rather than the full cost that the state should be providing. The plan that we are advocating for statewide would eliminate the 95 districts that will be receiving fewer ECS dollars across the next several years, one of which is Guilford, would increase excess cost funding to all districts across the state to 100% over a 2-year time period, would provide greater supports for the types of conversations we've been having that would be provided to districts out of the State Department of Education or the regional educational service centers. So, part of this is a local responsibility and a local conversation that we need to have every year. But I also want the community at large to know that as a school system, we recognize that we're not, the local taxpayer should not be the only contributor to this enterprise, and that there are efforts to leverage more support and more dollars from both the state and the federal level as well. And so we recognize those needs. We just want to make sure that the local Guilford taxpayer isn't shouldering those needs exclusively and alone, and that the state and that the federal level are carrying their share of those as well.
I'm recognizing that that we're at the 8 o'clock hour. I do want just to give the opportunity for any of the district leadership who has been almost entirely answering questions posed to them tonight. Is there anything you want us to know or think about as we look at this proposed budget and plan for next year? Is there anything you want us to keep in mind? I'll leave it at that. Just welcoming anything that may not be reflected or may not have been discussed tonight that would be useful for us to know or think about moving forward. All right, so then what I'm going to do is say, if you get off this meeting and go, oh, I just thought of this, funnel it back to us, because again, we would really like to, it's always useful as we look over the numbers to have anything additional that's in your minds or on your plates in mind, so that we use that information as we're moving these budget discussions forward. Is there any other board member who wants to take a minute to ask any additional questions at this time? I'm not seeing any hands raised. Dr. Freeman, is there anything that you would like to say? I didn't mean to shut the conversation down. I'm just recognizing the time. I'm recognizing we have very busy people who have already worked a long day, and I want to respect that additional time you've given us tonight.
That was the only additional piece that I was going to add, Dr. Balistraci, just to thank you to all the members of the leadership team who were here tonight. All your comments, and just again, 8 o'clock gets to be a long night when you start as early as you guys all start, and very much appreciate all of you being here for this conversation, as well as all the board members. We know that usually January and February are the months where your time gears up. You've been maintaining that level of investment since last March. Again, just really appreciate everybody's time to have this conversation and the really thoughtful and caring questions that were asked tonight. We very much appreciate that.
So I am just going to end by reminding the public that we do have Board of Ed public hearings on the budget on January 25th. That is a Monday, and January 26th, a Tuesday. Those will be, as you can imagine, virtual meetings, but they will be set up as public forums so that the board can hear your input directly. The Board of Ed themselves will be meeting next Tuesday, January 19th, in a joint meeting with the Board of Finance. This is our second meeting with them in the budget process. It allows us to have some discussions prior to any formal decision making around the budget. They are able to ask us questions. We are able to provide them with the rationale and the way that we're thinking about some of the decisions that are being made. Lastly, I will continue to encourage the public to reach out to us in other ways, via email, etc., with questions, concerns, comments, as we deliberate this budget process. And then, of course, also welcome the administrators who have joined us here tonight to let us know if there are things that come to mind following this meeting that you'd like us to think about. Thank you again so much for the time you've given us tonight. I know how hard and busy you're working, and and really another opportunity to say thank you for all that you do for the students in this district. I think we have come to understand just how extraordinarily lucky we are in this district to have the leadership that we have represented in this group tonight. We have always felt very lucky about that, but to watch all of you in the middle of the pandemic do what you do has really been extraordinary. So please know how much we notice and appreciate that. With that being said, I am going to ask for one of my colleagues to make a motion to adjourn the meeting this evening. Mr. Sands, thank you. Can I have a second?
Second.
Okay, thank you. All in favor? Aye. Good night. Happy New Year. I probably should have said at the top of the meeting, Happy New Year to all of you. Thank you for joining us. And we will be continuing these conversations over the next several weeks.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you.